Good evening. Glad you all are here. It's been a pretty day. This evening's lesson is entitled Resistance and Service, and it deals with how we manage persecution in our lives, how we ought to respond to it as Christians, which is obviously our concern as Christians. Text comes from Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 beginning. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. If any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. I do not believe the Bible teaches pacifism at all. We'll look at that here in just a moment. There are some brethren do. Gus Nichols, I don't know if that name means anything to some of you, but most of you it might, that he was a pacifist. And somebody asked him one time, well, Brother Nichols, what if you walked in the house and there was somebody in there assaulting your wife? And his response was, and I don't know how tongue-in-cheek he was saying it, but he said, the Lord knows that what I would do, and so I don't think he'd ever put me in that situation. Okay, there's providential hand of God, and I'm not saying, apparently it worked, because I never heard that he was in that situation. He had to go defend his wife. But as we'll see, it's not, self-defense isn't wrong. So in a time which we now live as Christians, how should we react to obvious assaults on our so-called personal rights and freedoms? And it's a very serious thing, because if we don't do it right, then obviously we're doing it wrong, and it's a sin. How far do we as New Testament Christians go to preserve those rights and freedoms? And are we allowed to at all, much less to what extent? In short, what should the Christian do in regard to the daily provocations we face? You know, I was a corrections officer for Polk County Sheriff's Department. Now, I had been tried to get on once as I was doing that. I wanted to be a road deputy. Found out that I didn't have the emotional system it took to do that kind of work. You know, I got to the point that if you weren't wearing my uniform, you was on the other team, and that's not a way to be. I mean, you can't. That's just not a way to be. And I had to get out of the work. And was that a sin to do so? It's a very serious question. Now, Jesus discusses in our text. Jesus discusses the law's view of revenge and retribution. And he quotes from Exodus chapter 21 and verse 38. He quotes from Exodus 21 and 24. And he also, the other verse I have down there say the same thing. And the point here is that revenge is not authorized. Now, in the state of Florida, at least it was a fact when I was down there working in the system, that if somebody attacks you, physically assaults you, say with a baseball bat or a tie iron or some stick or something, and you manage to get it away from him, and you start winning the fight, and that person says, I quit, anything you do after that turns into assault for you. So you can be arrested and charged and put in jail and put on trial. Because when he says enough, then that's enough. And I also know, because I sat on a murder trial, second-degree murder trial as a jury foreman, that if somebody if you're attacking somebody, I'm trying to think, I'm sorry, if you can escape, then you should escape. And you're not allowed to, again, at that time, if Gary's attacking me and it's possible for me to get away, then I'm to break off the attack and leave. And if I can and don't and get the best of him, I can be charged. Now, that's the law. Now, I don't like it. Doesn't matter. That doesn't affect the reality of the law. The law says what it says, and if you can get away, then you get away. I saw a film clip where a guy that was a self-defense instructor, he says, let me show you how you defend against a knife attack. And he says, you ready? Watch this. And he turned around and ran away. That's what you do. I I mean, just, and don't get in my way, because, I'm just saying. But the law's purpose, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, the law's purpose was to discourage the evildoer in the first place. Because if I do something to you, whatever harm, under the law of Moses, whatever harm I did to you, you could have done to me. Now, I'm not saying that you would be the one to do it, but the justice of it all would be that if I poked out your eye, then you could have my eye poked out. If I knocked out your tooth, and vice versa. And if the law would be, if justice would be swift and sure, then that's what would happen. Now, if everybody knows that whatever they do to somebody else is going to be done to them, and it's a surety, then it stops that kind of stuff. Paul Harvey once said years ago, he said at the time, of the last 128 people that have been executed in the state of Tennessee, not one of them has ever committed another crime. And a lot of folks get upset with capital punishment, but it's also the case that when capital punishment is done properly. Now, I'm not talking about the occasions when somebody's found to have been innocent. Okay, I'm talking about when somebody did the crime. Okay, and let's just say there's no question about they did it, and justice is swift and sure. It keeps other people from doing it also. It serves, although capital punishment is not there to deter anybody, it's for justice. It's for justice. Genesis 9 and verses 5 and 6, I believe it is, if you really want to go back and look at it. So anyways, the perpetrator knows that something's going to happen. He knows that justice will be swift and sure and equal. And that's the way it ought to be. There should be no partiality. You do the crime, you're going to do the time, period. I mean, it's just way it ought to. Now, you and I both know it doesn't work that way. We both know that. We all know that. And I understand that too. And that's not right. That's inappropriate. Now, in verse 39, notice Christ's command of non-resistance to evil. That it does not imply total resistance, total non-resistance. Now, verse 39 again says, "But I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other cheek also." Now, a slap in the face, a slap in the face is an insult. I mean, it's insulting. Just somebody just open hands you, as opposed to just punching you one. I mean, that's more manly than that is, and that's an insult. But it's just a slap in the face. Now, there's some pretty stout people that slap you in the face. You're going to be on the ground. I get that too, but it's still just a slap in the face. And if you see it coming, you can duck, you can run, you can escape. It's not, the context here is not a religious assault because you're a Christian kind of a deal. We're going to get you Christian folks. The text doesn't bear that out. If it's wrong to protect yourself against a slap in the face, so you can't resist evil. If to protect yourself from a slap in the face is resisting evil and you shouldn't do it, then you can't have keys in your pocket to keep the evil person out of your house. You can't have alarms. You can't call the police. Because a slap in the face that represents an evil assault implies somebody breaking into your house or doing anything else that's wrong. And if you've got those, oh yes ma'am, oh yes ma'am, yes ma'am, that's the case, that's the fact. Because a slap in the face isn't just a slap in the face, it's an evil attack. And breaking in your house and the rest of that would go along with it. So it's not advocating absolute passivity. Now, Jesus told his disciples, and you can look it up, Luke 22 and Matthew 26, to get a sword. And Peter said, well, here's two. And Jesus says, it's enough. And in the garden, when Peter pulled out his sword and took off the ear of Malchus' servants, the servant of Malchus, Jesus healed it and said, put your sword away. And the context there is what's fixing to happen. you're not to prevent, because it's God's will that I go to the cross. Although it doesn't say that, that's the implication. But they weren't condemned for having a sword to protect themselves, because it wasn't the disciples that they were after. The disciples could have protected themselves. It was Jesus they wanted. Again, you go back and read that for yourself. Notice Romans 12 and verse 19. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, now here's why he says that. It is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, thus saith the Lord. Vengeance. I'm going to go find those people and I'm going to take care of it myself. That's vengeance. Me being backed into a corner and protecting myself, me getting in the way of somebody attacking one of you all, is not vengeance. It's protecting ourselves. Now you say, well, where's the authority for that? Okay, we're going to get into that here in the next point. But I'm just simply saying that even Jesus himself authorized a defensive weapon. Okay? So if Jesus authorized it, then it'd be okay for us. And if not, why not? I mean, I would be interested in hearing the discussion. And by the way, if you really want an in-depth discussion on it, if you really want to study it, I've got a term paper that one of my instructors at the School of Preaching did for his master's degree, The Case for the Christian Policeman. And it's about yay thick. And I'd hate to get turned loose of it, but if you want to borrow it, I'd let you have it for a couple of days, and I'll come get it too, by the way. I'm just saying, you have to know what the terms are going in. Now, Jesus gives examples on the use of the law. Now, again, in context of the law of Moses. In the realm of physical violence, of people doing physical violence to you, personal resistance to personal injustice. Personal resistance to personal injustice. Jesus himself, when he's standing, now he's on trial, and he makes a comment there in John 18, and he gets slapped in the face. He said, wait a minute. If I've done evil, then you tell me what evil I've done. In other words, you're not justified in slapping me in the face because I haven't done anything that's evil. If I've done evil, then you need to tell me what it is. Of course, they couldn't do it, and they weren't going to do it anyways. Paul in Acts chapter 16, verse 35, and he's in Philippi, and he's preaching, and he gets beaten, he and Silas, and he's thrown in prison. And he's told the jailer that whipped him, or that supervised the whipping, I'm a Roman citizen. Uh-oh. You don't whip a Roman citizen without a trial. So that word was passed on to the city fathers that ordered the whipping in the first place. And they came in they sent word the next morning, okay, you can turn him loose and tell him to go ahead and leave town. And Paul says, no, you go get them and you tell them to come get me out of jail. I'll wait. And they showed up and turned him loose. They were afraid because they were going to be in trouble with the emperor for beating a Roman citizen without a trial. So Paul appealed to law, to the common law, to protect himself. Over in chapter 23, Paul he's before the Sanhedrin also. And he says, let me just turn over there. 23 verse 1, and Paul earnestly beholding the council said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? So Paul appealed to law for defense. And they stood by, Revilest thou God's high priest? And said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. Well, I think he said that somewhat sarcastically because the ruler of the people shouldn't have done that. He broke the law himself in doing that. And then if you go down further, in Acts chapter 23 there was about 40 Jews that came to the Sanhedrin, and they had bound themselves under an oath that they wouldn't eat until they'd killed Paul. It didn't take them very long to either break that oath or die. Because what did Paul do? He got, John Mark, his nephew, came to him and said, listen, they're fixing to, they're laying in wait to slay you, and they take you up to, well, it's that other city, Caesarea, I think it was, Caesarea. So Paul told the centurion, you listen to this man. So long story short, they had 200-foot soldiers and I don't know how many cavalry with spears and stuff to escort Paul to Caesarea. Now, if it's wrong to protect yourself against evil, Paul sinned. I mean, that has to be your conclusion. So there's nothing wrong with picking up the phone and dialing 911. Now, here's another thought. If it's a sin to defend yourself, Paul called on civil government to protect him. So Paul caused the civil authorities to sin in protecting him. And if not, why not? If it's a sin for me to protect myself, then me dialing 911 to get the police to come out to protect me would be causing them to sin. If it's a sin to offer protection. Well, they're non-Christians. So, non-Christians sin. And are you telling me that there's an activity that is only a sin, that's only sinful for a Christian to engage in? If it's a sin, if it's transgression of God's law, it's transgression of God's law, just period. And if I can't protect me, then I can't ask somebody else to protect me without sin, them committing sin. These things are serious questions that need to be discussed. Now, when the honor of Christ and the salvation of man demands passivity, we should surrender. If it's just a personal injustice, that's one thing. If it's the honor of Christ and the gospel, that's another thing. In Matthew 10:23, but when they persecute you in this city, flee ye into another, for verily I say unto you, ye shall not have gone over the cities of Israel till the Son of Man be come. Now, it doesn't say you have to stand there and let them beat on you. Jesus gives authority to flee. And to me, that's the wiser course of action. In Romans chapter 12, recompense to no man evil for evil, provide things honest in the sight of all men. So regardless of what everybody else is doing, you live the faithful Christian life. You walk righteously. Now notice verse 18. If it be possible, this is a conditional statement. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. It may not be possible to live peaceably with some people. Now, we still can't engage in vengeance, and I don't have the authority to be mean to anybody. But the implication is I can at least defend myself to some extent, even if it's just leaving. Dearly beloved, notice this, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Then in verse 20 he draws a conclusion. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger. Now the guy that's persecuting you, let's say he's chasing you down and he trips and falls and bangs his head and knocks himself out. Aha, I'm going to beat him to death now. No. That would be absolutely wrong. What do you do? Well, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Now, I would suggest to you that implies caring for the person that's in need to the extent you're able to do so. You mean I'm supposed to help the fellow that just tried to kill me? I don't know. You have to ask the Spirit about that one. All I know is he says, hunger, feed him, thirsty, give him to drink. And if he's bleeding to death, then you try to stop the bleeding. That's what a Christian does. Let us do good unto all men, especially the household of faith. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10. Now, if you don't do it, that's another question completely. I mean, that's something you're going to have to answer for in the day of judgment. And it's something you need to think about. Now, I understand you. I can understand you stand there going from foot to foot deciding what you should do. I'll put a patch on him and then I'll run. Okay. Then he said, be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. So that's what I'm supposed to do. That's what I'm supposed. Now, how it works out in a particular situation with a particular detail, you're there, not me. You have to decide how you're going to do this in that situation. Nobody has sufficient wisdom to say, here's how you do it each and every time. I don't have that wisdom. If you know somebody that does, I'd be glad to talk to them because I've got some questions I want answered. Brother Willie had some for me this morning. I've got a whole bunch myself. Because when you're in a personal situation, it's just that. It's personal, and we have to use the guidelines the Scriptures gave us and apply them appropriately. Now, what about judicial injustice? Going back to our text, verse 40. If any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. This is a legal persecution. And go back to Exodus chapter 22. The cloak is used as surety. Gary, now back then you didn't have many changes of clothing if you did at all. Matter of fact, I lived in a house in Greensburg that the closet, when you open up the door and step inside, you couldn't step inside that closet because it was about as deep as a hanger was. I mean, it wasn't any deeper than that right there, and it was only about that wide. So you couldn't put much in there. Matter of fact, it had pegs on the wall. That's where you hung your coat and your shirt and your good pants, okay, because everything else you was wearing. So, if Gary and I are in a business situation, and I'm asking him to do something for me, he says, well, okay, give me your cloak, and when you do this thing over here, I'll give your cloak back to you. Well, that's my blanket, and it's fixing to be cold tonight, so I guess I better go ahead and get this done so he's satisfied. Paint that sign out there the way it's supposed to be painted, and I'll get my cloak back tonight. That's the surety of the thing. That's how that thing worked. Now, this fella here, in verse 40, he's suing me at law. Now, why he's suing me at law, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't say. And he's fixing to get my coat, my cloak. That's the context. So the text indicates the law was being abused. It was not a life-endangering situation. You know, my life's not in danger here. He's suing. Well, it says there, he wants to take away my coat. He's suing me for my coat. Not trying to throw me in jail or persecute. I mean, he's obviously persecuting me, but he's not trying to do me bodily harm. So what do? Well, I just go ahead and give him the coat. And if you want to heap coals of fire on his head, give him your cloak also. Okay? And then you suffer the consequences. A righteous appeal to the law is not precluded. Countersuit. Go get your own lawyer. Don't show up by yourself. Always have a lawyer. Okay? That's what you do. That's just good common sense. I can protect myself without vengeance. If somebody's attacking me, I can defend myself. But when he says enough, that's when the fight starts. Now, I'm not going to stand there and put my hands down. We're backing up. We're getting distance between us. That's just training. You just back up. You put distance between you. Because somebody with a knife 20 feet away, your gun's holstered, and they're 20 feet away, and they pull out a knife and charge you, you won't get your gun out before they get to you. That's a fact. That's a fact. Unless you're Jesse James or Superman, okay, kind of a deal. So I can protect myself. I can appeal to law without bitterness. I find nothing in Acts 16 or 22 where Paul was bitter. Now, he might have been angry getting slapped in the face like that, but he wasn't bitter about it. And I can resist repressive government as a patriot. You look at Romans, just briefly, it's not on the outline, but you look at Romans chapter 13, I think there's a passage, and it's 1 Peter chapter 2, or I think it's 1 Peter chapter 4, where it talks about government again. Government's purpose is to protect the righteous from the unrighteous and to bear the sword not in vain. The sword represents capital punishment. That's the purpose of government. Now, when the government stops doing that and starts being the source of evil itself, then a whole other operation comes into play. And again, there's folks that would disagree with that. I understand that, but they have to make the argument against it. Christians are to be liberally generous. And by that, when I say liberally, I'm not referring to doctrinal issues. I'm talking about generosity. If somebody's in need, if I've only got a can of beans, then I share my beans with them. Now, they only get half of that can, but I'm going to share my beans with them. That's what you do. Now, if I've got 2 cans of beans, I'll give them 1 can of beans. I can use all legal means to protect my legitimate interests. I can pick up 911. I can call the police. I can get a lawyer and protect myself. If somebody come in and tried to sue us, and another group came in and tried to take over this building, well, I'd say we go get a lawyer right now. I wouldn't hesitate. Nobody's going to get this without a fight. They're going to break a sweat if they would try to get it. That's just the law is there for that purpose, to protect us from evildoers. Let's use the law appropriately, and if we have to countersue, then that's what we do. But when all is said and done, we need to observe Paul's words in 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 12. Yea, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. And persecution doesn't mean that somebody's running you down to beat you with a stick or throw you in jail. They're just not being nice to you in a very unnice way. And you know what I'm talking about. People are abusive to you in some form or fashion simply because you're trying to live a righteous life. And they don't like it, and they say things about you. I mean, they don't have to say anything to you. They say it to everybody else. Gossip. That can be persecution too. What do? You pray for them. You pray for them. Put their name on your prayer list. Why should I pray for them? First of all, it'll help you get over it. I mean, you pray for somebody, you pray for them sincerely, you're not going to have hard feelings toward them. I'm not saying you'll be happy with them, don't misunderstand me, but it'll change your attitude towards them. And God may hear your prayer, or He's going to hear your prayers, and He may answer in such a way that the situation is resolved favorably. Maybe that person repents and comes to you and says, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done, said, or whatever it is I did. Well, I've been praying for you. And sometimes telling somebody, well, I'm praying for you. And you do so. And you don't say that just to be saying something. You actually pray for them. But there does come a time when we have to stand and take it, when we're thrown in the arena, and we have to allow the lions, tigers, and bears to assault us and kill us. We've never had to face that around here, but who knows what's down the road and who's going to be doing what? I mean, would you have thought we'd have been where we are now 5 years ago or 3 years ago? No, but here we are. The Bible is a practical document. I mean, it's spiritual, obviously, but it tells us how to live, and sometimes in exacting detail how to live. And other times it gives us the principles that we have to work them out on our own, in our own individual situation. Because otherwise you wouldn't be able to carry the book that covered every situation known to man. But it teaches us principally. And our task is to live faithfully before God and man. So that people, now in 1 Peter chapter 4, you read that, you're down through about verse 11 or 12, and you'll see that people are going to speak evil of you anyways. And the thing is you live in such a way that when somebody does speak evil of you, the person they're talking to says, well, I know that person. I've never seen that. I don't know what you're seeing. There's your justification. So our job is to always be the faithful Christian. Sometimes that gets harder than others, but that's our job nonetheless, because we'll meet the works we work on the day of judgment. And that's what ought to motivate us to make sure that our works are faithful to the Christ and His gospel. So if you're here and you need our prayers, Bible study, that's what we're here for. We're not here to shake fingers in anybody's faces necessarily, but we're here to help one another get to heaven. So if you need to respond to the invitation of Christ, we invite you to come while together we stand and sing.